In this video, we are talking about the table widget from the TTK widget library. We are first running the example from the repository, then adding some stuff. So if you run the example, you can see that the widget looks like a table. So here I'm running. This is the table created by the example. So we have columns, headings, values for each column, and we have this 3 checkbox added with the example. Each one of them has a particular role or a particular function. For example, if I click on this checkbox called Sortable, I will add the ability to sort the columns according to their values. For example, if I click on the column A, I will sort the entire table according to the values in the column A. So here it was in ascending order. Since I clicked, it will be in descending order. If I click again, it will be in ascending order again. The values in the column A are of type int. This is why the order went well. Now if I click on the column B, you can see that the order doesn't seem right, but in fact it is correct. In fact, the values of the column B are of type string. This is why we have this sort of results. For example, we have 0, then 1, then and 1, 0 instead of the value 2. The order attributes or the order properties that we can change for the table. There is this drag columns, which means that we can move the columns or drag the columns. Here I'm moving the column B. There is another property, drag rows, which means I can move the rows. For example, here I'm clicking on the first row and I am moving this row. You can see that the row is moving. To be able to create a table, first you import it from TTK widgets. To install the library, pip install TTK widgets and then call table, specifying some arguments specific to the table widget and others to the TreeView widget, since the table widget is created using the TreeView widget from Tkinter. One of the attributes specific to the table widgets are sortable, whether or not the columns are sortable, if we can drag the columns, and if we can drag the rows. You can also specify the list of columns. This is where the columns are created. You pass them while creating the table. You can also specify them later using the configure method. We have also the high here. It's equal to 6. And there are other attributes like the show attribute, for example, whether or not to show the table with headings or as a tree. Then we customize the columns. Here our list of columns is from A to G. So for each column from this list, we are going to call, for example, here heading that will set the text of the column. And here we are calling column to specify other attributes, like for the width, here the width is equal to 100, and whether or not the column is searchable or adaptable to the text. Here the column A, identified by A, is type is changed to int. By default, all the types are of type string. This loop will insert 12 rows. The values of the columns are inserted by row, and here each row will represent later an item and is identified by IID, and here we are specifying the parent of each row. By default, if you want a simple table, you will have all the values inserted as children of the roots, or they will have the parent root. And so you specify an empty string. Here are the values added using the property values, and you can specify the values using a tuple or using a list. Here a tuple is used. So we have the first two columns will have the same values, but the first value will be for the column 1, or for the first column for the column A will be of type int, because the type is int. For the second column, it will be string, and for here the values for the rest of the columns. Here is the positioning of the scroll bars and for the checkbox. Now what we are going to do, we will add buttons and entries to be able to call the available methods on the table to understand more the attributes that we can pass to these methods and what they can do. So I added these labels, entries and these buttons the same way I've done it with this video, the checkbox preview widget. In this video I'm going to focus on how these methods are called, their parameters and their results. But if you want more details about how the keyword arguments, for example, are processed or other arguments, just write in the comments below details. We will start with the cget method. It needs only one parameter, the key or the option you want to know the value of. For example, I want to know the value of columns of my table. Cget will return this value. You can see here the columns of the table. If I want, for example, the type of show, cget tells me it's headings. If I want to know if the table is sortable or the columns are sortable, cget, it tells false. Now I will change this and call cget again. It tells me true. Now we look into the configure method. So we specify keywords and their corresponding values. There are keywords or properties related to the preview widget and others related specifically to the table widget. For example, I can specify the attribute show and set it to tree and call configure. Now the tree or the behavior or the appearance of the table changed. I can get it back to table or to headings by setting show to headings. When we created the table, it had only 6 rows, or the high was 6. Now I'm going to change the high and set it to, for example, 7 and call configure again. We can see that the high changed. We also have the columns attributes. I can change the columns we had from A to G. I'm going to specify, for example, A, B and C and call configure again. You can see that we have only 3 columns, but we can see that the text of the columns or the labels of the columns disappeared. Now we are looking to delete method. It is used to delete the items or the rows. So here the items are identified by their position. For example, our item 0 or the first item is identified by ID 0, the second one by ID 1, etc. So if I want to delete the first one, all I have to do is specify 0 and call delete. If I want to delete 3 and 5, I have to specify 3 and 5. To remember, you can see that 3 and 5 were deleted. Here the items are not passed as the list, but the item themselves. For example, here, if I want to delete only 0 and 2, I will have to specify 0 and 2. Going to run the code again to test it out. You can see here, if I click on this is 0, this is 2. If I click on delete, 0 and 2 disappear. Now we are looking into the detach method. The same principle we seen with the delete. We specify the items we want to detach. In here, the items or the rows will be unlinked from the tree, but they will be still existing, not deleted, but they will not be displayed, so they will not be visible. For example, I want to detach 1 and 3 and call detach. Now they are detached. We can't detach the root row or the root item. Now we are looking into the heading method. You can use the heading method either to request the values of the properties of your headings or to modify these properties. To request the values, you either specify only the column, in this case all the properties are returned. For example, I want to get the values of the heading of the column A and call heading, so I will have all the values returned. Now if I want to request the value of only one option, for example text, all I have to do is add the argument option and add to it the value or the option I want to get the value, and call heading again. Now it gave me only the value of text, which is A. Now if you want to modify the values, you have to specify the keywords, arguments, property and value. For example, I can change and say text equal col1 and add another argument if I want. Set headings. Now heading changed. I can also specify an image. For example, I have image in the path dg or with the path dg.png and specify here, for example, column 2 and call heading again. We have here column 2 and here we have the new image. Now we are looking into the insert method, the one you use to insert a new row. For that you specify the parent, the index, the IID. If it's known, it will be returned by the function or by the method, and also keyword arguments, the one that you can pass to the method item. In our case, we are going to specify only the values attributes. So for example, here on the root or in the root, I will create a new row item at index 0, and its IID will be, for example, AA, and the values 1, 2 and 3, and call insert. I added this new row at the root. I can also add children to one of these items. For example, for the item with the IID 1, I will add at index 0 another item, for example AB with the value 1, and I'm going to call insert. We cannot see the child of this item or of this row, so I'm going to change the show attribute of the table to 3, call configure. You can see now that the table is of configure, is of type 3, and I can here see the added child to this item. Now we are going to see the item method. It works as or like the heading method. You can use it to either create the value of an option or to define new values for specific options. For example, here, if you specify only the item, for example, item 1, and I call item, it will return the value of all the properties related to that item. Now, if you specify one option, for example, I'm going to specify values, it will return only the values. I didn't write it correctly. It will return the values, or yes, the values of the key, only for the key values. Now, if you want to specify or modify an option, for example, values, I will modify the values for the item 1. I'm going to specify the values 5, 6, 7. I will not specify all the values, and call item. You can see that the values change to 5, 6, 7. I can also specify another value. For example, I can specify image equal to cci.png. The image must exist. So here, as table, in that way we cannot see the image associated with the item. So I will change the show property for the table to 3 for configure. Now we can see this is the image I've used. Of course, if you specify an image that does not exist, it will throw you an error. Here the image must be of type photo image. This is the first element. The second element is to be able to use the image. The configure method or setting the property is not enough. You have to save the image in some way to the table object. For example, the images related to the table or to the items of the table are saved in this dictionary associated with the image IT attribute that I initialized in the beginning to an empty dictionary. I did the same for the headings. The attribute of image headings are also initialized with an empty dictionary. There is another attribute related to an item, is the attribute open. Open means that we can see the children. If it's false, we cannot. If it's true, we can. For example, I'm going to insert a child to the item 1. Our index will be 0 and its ID AA, and the values, well, 1 to 30. Insert. Now I'm not seeing it, so I'm going to change the attribute of item 1 to open to true and call item. You can see now that the child we've added is visible. Now if I set back open to false, call item, the item is not, or the child is not visible. Now we are seeing the method move. You specify the item you want to move, the parent where you want to put that item, and the index, its position regarding the other children. For example, here I want to move the item 1 to position 5, but I want to keep the parent, so I want to keep it in the root. So I will call move. You can see that the position of 1 changed. Now I can also change its parent. For example, I will move it to parent 2, position 0, and call move. Now the parent or the item is no longer visible. To make it visible, I'm going to change the attribute 2 or the attribute open of the item 2 to true. Going to call item. We can see here the value of, you can see the child of 2 is visible. If I put it to false item, it's not visible anymore. There is also another thing. You cannot move a parent to its descendant, and if an item is detached, you can it can be reattached again when calling move. For example, here I'm going to detach the 3 or the item 2. I'm going to call detach. It's not visible. Now I'm going to move 2 to the root and at position, for example, 6, and call move. You can see here that the item 2 was moved to the index 6, even if it's detached. But if an item was deleted, for example, if I delete the item 2 and I call the move again, it will generate an error. Now we are seeing the method set. If you specify one value, the item, it will return the values of that item. If you specify 2 arguments, the second one being the column, it will return the value of that column. If you specify 3 arguments, the third argument will be the value that you will assign or you want to assign to the column of that item. For example, here I have the row 2 or the item 2. I call set, it returned the values of that item. Now if I specify the column B and call set, it will return only the value of B, which is equal to 2. If I call, for example, D set, it returns 32, this value. Now if I specify a new value, for example, text, it will set text to this column for this item. Now we are talking about the set children method. You specify the item and the new children. For example, here for the item 1, I will specify the children 0 and 2 and call set children. Now for one, the children are not visible, so I'm going to change its attribute open to true, and you can see here I didn't write open correctly. You can see here the item 0 and 2 added as children for the item 1. Another thing to consider regarding the set children method, here you can, or the way you can specify the children for the set children method, you can use the asterisk and the list, or you specify the children. For example, for the item 0, I'm going to add the children 1, 2, and 3. Why not? Okay, so you can see after running the code, if I call set children, you can see that 1, 2, 3 where now are children of the item 0. So I can change open equal to see that. You can see item 1, 2, and 3. The keys method will return the keys of the table widgets, and the keys will be the keys of the TreeView widget. Added to them the specific keys of the table widget, sortable, dark rows, and one odd thing here, there's another key that must be available in this list, which is dark rows. I don't know why they didn't include it here. So if I click on keys, I will have all the keys, but not the dark rows, even if it actually exists and we used it, or it was used when created table. For example, if I use it now, dark rows equal true, and try to change the position of the rows, it will work. Now if I set it to false again, now the key is not moving. Oh, the row is not moving. Same thing here for the method column as for the heading method or the item method. If you specify only the column, it will return the values of all the properties of column. If you specify one option, it will return the value of that option. If you specify keyword values, it will set the values for this keyword. For example, I'm going to return the values of column A. I'm going to call column with only one argument, A, and these are the return values. For example, I can change the width for A or request only the width. I'm going to say width as second argument, call column. We have the value of the width. I will try to set the width to 30, call column. We change the width. I can also set other attributes. So now other attributes, as I've said, you just call with the column method with the column only attribute. For example, here the anchor is W for west. I'm going to set back the width to 100 and the column or anchor to, for example, east. So I'm going to call column. You can see that the anchor of the column changed. I can put it to center. Column. You can see now it's in the center. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.